As a new real estate investor, today's video is going to be all about breaking down every single different asset class for you so you know exactly what real estate investment makes the most sense for you to jump into. What I want to first do is break down risk, because I want you to understand that by diving into the real estate world, there is a major variety, there's a huge spectrum of risk that you can get involved in. How risk adverse are you? Every single person, right, including yourself, right, we all have it, me too, we all have different levels of risk that we are willing to get involved in. So let's break this down for a second, because there are some investments that are very low risk, incredibly low risk, okay, or much lower risk than many others, right? So something like a hotel, or like something like a car wash, or several other different asset classes like a business, that is much more risky than buying something like a triple net lease with maybe one or two tenants. Most people thought, and to the truth of it, a lot of these triple net leases, these are very, very strong long-term investments. We're gonna have very little, if almost zero, management requirements. Some people thought the same exact way about Rite Aid and Walgreens, or even like Dollar Trees, right? Where like all of a sudden now they're closing a bunch of stores. No one planned the pandemic to happen, where that changed everything. Where all of a sudden some of these types of businesses, which people bought these types of properties at crazy high price per square foot because they were looking at just specifically the cap rate when they were looking to buy the property. And the problem when you do that is that you can get stuck with your hand in the cookie jar. You can get caught with your hand in the cookie jar when you try to do that way. That's why I always believe, and one thing we're going to talk about today, is that you must always be buying a property at a good intrinsic price, which typically we like to say is below intrinsic value, right? Below market value. That you always want to make sure that you are buying below market value to some percentage. Last thing to talk about when it comes to risk is that there is obviously so much in the middle, okay? Which a lot of what we're gonna talk about today is in the middle. Some risk, not a ton of risk, but some risk, because you're gonna be diversified with many tenants, right? The multiple tenants, the lower the risk, because you have the ability, typically when you have multiple tenants, that it's diversified, right? Like, because it would be very unlikely if you have a 20-unit apartment building, as an example, that you're gonna have 20 vacancies, right? Like, it would be very rare, but you might have a percentage of vacancy. And obviously, depending on the type of asset, a bank would even typically require much higher percentages of assumed vacancy rates when it comes to underwriting the property. So this is just something to consider. So we've got a good idea of risk, right? You have to judge yourself, quickly, on a scale of 1 to 10, how risk adverse are you? The next step here is understanding your investment experience, specifically in real estate. Because what's important to note is that a lot of people, very seasoned investors, still invest with GPs, which is a general partner. They're willing to be an LP, which is a limited partner, which means you have limited responsibilities, and the only responsibility you have is to cut a check. So it's okay if you have, hypothetically, you have a very low risk tolerance, right? You just want to basically get into a deal where you don't really, have much experience also when it comes to investing in real estate, and you have some money set aside and you want to make sure your money's safe. Investing with a GP, a general partner like myself, someone who raises money and buys great deals, where you can review a WEM and offering memorandum, you can review the deal deck, and where in that deal deck or in the offering memorandum, you can kind of see what the return should be like. Now, the cool thing about being a limited partner, which by the way, I'm a limited partner in some deals and I'm a GP in some deals. So it's important to pay attention that both have its strengths. For a very long time, I started out as an LP, which is a limited partner. I would take my commission and I would roll it into the deal and I would become a limited partner. Know that for somebody like yourself, maybe you don't have a license when you're watching this video, but you're interested in investing in real estate to some small extent, just to kind of dip your toes in the water, because you might be very risk adverse. And that's okay, because I was the same exact way. I hate losing money. Warren Buffett's first rule of money, or making, investing, is don't lose money. And rule number 2 is pay attention to rule number 1. So, it's very important to realize that is totally okay to be risk adverse and not want to lose money. But what's not okay is not investing in real estate at all. I would definitely recommend investing in real estate. What you should be doing is paying attention to who are the people who source great deals, finding people like myself who can source great deals, and placement of money for somebody like yourself who's looking to invest in real estate. Like, I just have a friend of mine who called me up and said, hey, coming into some money soon, and I'm looking to invest in real estate, but I really don't know much about real estate. One of the options you have, beyond just going and investing in one of these asset classes, which we'll talk about in today's video, but it's also understanding it's okay to be a limited partner. Because if you want to get into much larger deals, realize that most of the large deals all around the world are owned by many people, if not organizations. Many organizations together own larger properties, right? They pool money together to buy these large properties. There's many owners. It's okay to be a limited partner. Many people do it. It is very common. And the cool part also is that you don't have really much risk For the most part, obviously you want to make sure the deal doesn't make sense. I'm not trying to say that's 100% risk-free. Obviously, check with your accountant, financial advisor, make sure the whole nine works. And I'm not telling you who to invest with. I am saying that sometimes it can be better for you to invest with a GP who knows what they're doing and has a good track record. Somebody like myself who's done multiple deals where I can explain to you hey, within a fairly good margin of error, we're going to have X returns and you would get a percentage, right? It's a good possibility where somebody like yourself, if you're very risk adverse and you got some money and you've never bought a deal, right, you have a very low level of seasoned experience in real estate investing, can jump into. Now, for those of you who are beginners, and let's just say you've bought a few properties before, a couple single families, or maybe a couple duplexes, small multifamily, small retail, the point is you have some level of experience. What's good news is that there's also plenty of asset classes for you to be invested in, and you can start small. It's totally okay. I know Grant Cardone talks about starting massive, right, starting with 32 units in the apartment world. Grant, I love you. You've absolutely changed my life. I literally cannot say a bad word about you. You've done so much for me, and in this instance, I disagree with you, right? I do believe that some people should start small, right? Especially if they want to do it all themselves, right? Don't get me wrong. If you're going to invest as an LP, I probably wouldn't just invest in an LP for a 5-unit deal. I'd probably invest in a much larger deal because the returns can be larger. It's much easier to manage. I agree with you, everything that you're saying. But if someone wants to go do their own deal, just like you might right now, then I would obviously recommend that if you go from a single family or duplex or a 4-family, you probably shouldn't go to 32 units right away. But I would recommend maybe going to 8 or 10 or 15 or 20, right? Something in that, just making small jumps, because by the way, the bank is going to need to see that you've done something in the past. You can't just jump to 40 units and get qualified. Even if you had $10 million in the bank, and if you've never bought a multifamily before, they're typically not going to give you a loan unless you're going to dump a ton of money into the bank's checking accounts so that they can lend it out. For the most part, banks actually limit people from being able to invest in larger deals right off the bat. Okay, so let's talk about asset classes. Let's talk about multifamily first. We've been talking about it a little bit. Multifamily is where I started, right? So I started in single families. I did, almost 100 flips, rental property, the single family rentals, the whole 9 yards, and then I got into smaller multis and then into larger multis. So multifamily to me is something I have a lot of experience in, and I can talk from a lot of personal experience, where multifamily, I believe, is one of the very, very strong asset for somebody who's very new to the industry, the world of investing, where it's a simple thing to get into. Because most of the time people understand it. It's a pretty simplistic understanding of the game of multifamily, understanding that you have a building, you have units where everyone's going to live, right? You have apartments typically where you're going to have these units where people are going to live. They need utilities, right? You're going to pay typically the property taxes and insurance and probably the water. The tenants are going to pay their typically heat and electric. You kind of understand the fundamentals. I mean, this is pretty basic stuff for the most part, right? And you can get into these types of properties, typically the lowest amount of money down of anything we're going to talk about today. Multifamily is always going to be in high demand. Currently it's in extreme demand. It will continuously be in high demand. Housing is in major demand, and it will be for the years to come. So it's it's a very, very strong asset that you should be getting into regardless at some point in your career. I believe it's a fantastic investment. Long term, it's going to be there forever. People are going to need housing. It's not like that's going anywhere, right? All of a sudden, office, which we're going to be spending a very small amount of time on, because I would tell you, do not invest in office space. That's why I don't want to really talk about it, because I don't want to give you the idea that it's a smart idea to do it. It's not a smart idea. Do not invest in office. I don't care who's telling you what else. I think it's a terrible investment. Multifamily is going to be around for quite some time, for many, many, many years to come. I think it's a fantastic investment, something that, very, very easy. Start small, get involved with a smaller multifamily if you have yet to do so, right? If you've never got into, if this is going to be your first investment ever, I think multifamily can be a very simplistic way for you to kind of get into something small, very, very low money down in retrospect to other asset classes, and kind of have a kind of ease your way into the game of real estate. The biggest thing when it comes to multifamily is the where you're investing, the state specifically that you're investing in. I'm from New Jersey. I own a lot of multifamilies in New Jersey, and the laws, the tenant laws, the landlord-tenant laws are not ultra favorable for landlords, right? It's very favorable for tenants in the state of New Jersey. If I could choose to do it all over again, would I still invest in New Jersey? Yes. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to not invest where I live, of course, but I just wanted to have a little bit more of an understanding of this, because I did not understand that. Because I invested in the first ever multifamily property I ever bought was in a town called Red Bank, okay? I lived in Red Bank for many years. What's interesting though is that Red Bank has very strong and strict rent control laws. I did not know that, where I can only increase the rents by the CPI index, which means literally for a period of time where it was literally 2 or 3% a year. I mean, it's just terrible that I had tenants that I had bought the property with who were paying $1,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment. I was like, hey, we got to figure out some type of increase here. And then they literally CC'd the township when I sent them a lease to increase the rent by a substantial amount, because I didn't understand how the game works. So it was not great, but that's why there's plenty of areas in the state of New Jersey which I love to invest in, which don't have rent control, which you can still make a ton of money in. So I'm not saying we don't invest in New Jersey as a whole, but if you can choose, like if you're gonna invest out of state, you should invest in red states typically, because it's very landlord friendly. And if you're gonna invest in your own state and you're in a blue state, not to get crazy political, it's very important to pay attention to your rent control laws. And if there is rent control in your specific town, don't invest in your town, okay? Unless you're getting a fantastic, unbelievable deal, I tell you, even then, be careful, because it's very, very difficult to get around rent control in some cities. Next, let's talk about retail. Yes, this is like your neighborhood shopping centers. This is anything from a freestanding building with a business involved in it, right? Typically, that's something that you can walk into traditionally, right? This will be something like, a nail salon, a barber shop, a dry cleaner, as you name it, pizzeria, the whole 9 yards, right? Like, we're talking about retail for a quick moment. When it comes to retail, this can also be an interesting opportunity for a beginning real estate investor. I would just recommend a few things. When you're looking at retail properties, what's important to note, above and beyond what we've talked about at the very beginning, which is making sure you buy below intrinsic value, is you want to be looking for properties that also have the following qualities. Number one, it's not just one tenant. Typically, you would like to try to find a property that has multiple tenants. The more tenants, the more diversity, okay? Because you want to make sure that, you will have vacancy when it comes to retail properties. I'm telling you right now, you will have vacancy. You want to make sure that you have a number of tenants, and a bunch of smaller tenants is a smart thing. You also want to be looking at it where, a bunch of 500 square foot tenants is probably not smart, because only so many tenants are going to want 500 square feet. So you're going to try to find properties that have a bunch of tenants, typically between, something around 1,000 maybe at the smallest, something close to that range, maybe 800 to 1,200 square feet at the absolute smallest, all the way up to a few thousand square feet at the absolute largest. Because what happens here is that you don't want to have any tenant specifically that has more than really, 40, 50% occupancy in the building, because they might leave, and if they do leave, your building's all the way down to half vacant, right? Or half occupied. So it's important to pay attention, hey, I want to have a bunch of tenants, as many tenants as I can possibly afford to buy, where I have as much diversity as possible between the tenants. And also what's important to look at is the leases. So when you're looking at leases, because you're going to be buying the leases, that's what you're essentially doing when you're buying retail or industrial. You're specifically buying leases. So you want to be paying attention to what the leases state. In the lease, you're going to want to look for a few things. Number one, is it a gross lease, which means you, the landlord, pay all the expenses, or is it triple net, which means the tenant pays all of the expenses? And yes, there's a middle ground called modified gross. You want to be able to, basically, you could show this to your local real estate agent, or you could look at this with your accountant or your attorney. They'll look it over with you and make sure that you understand everything. So it's important to make sure you understand how to read a lease. And then the other piece that's incredibly important when it comes to looking at leases is the rental increases. So you're going to look at how much money year over year, if any, is there an increase in rent every year. This can be as simple as, it could be zero, right? You could just literally have hypothetically $1,000 a month every month for the next 5 years, right? That would be zero. Or you could have 2% or 3% increases a year, which can be very, very typical, which means that hypothetically you're going from $1,000 to $1,000, if it's 2%, right? $1,020 the next year, then a 2% increases on top of that. So I guess, I'm making things up, but $1,042. And then the point is it increases by 2% every single year, and that's all outlined. So you're going to look at the increases, and then you want to see how many options they have. So let me explain to you a quick example here. So there was a property that I was looking at, and all the tenants, as per the landlord told me, everything is on a triple net lease. I'm going to tell you, he then sent me, after I went into contract, he finally got me all the leases, and half of them were triple net and half of them were not triple net. Very big problem, because I underwrote the property where all of them were triple net, and he had sent me a few leases that were triple net, and when he sent me all of them, not all of them were triple net. Very bad thing, but we ended up killing the deal, obviously, but because the numbers didn't pencil after that. So don't just take people's word at face value. After we looked at everything, this is what's incredibly crucial. What absolutely killed the deal was not only the fact that some of the tenants weren't triple net, which is okay, but the problem was they were locked in for a very long period of time at very low rent. They were gross rents at a low price, and they were locked in for 4 more years on the first 5-year lease, and then they had an option for another 5-year renewal. So it was like a 9-year lease with somebody who was not on triple net, who also had a very, very low base, right? Very, very low gross rent in general. So very low price per square foot. I was like, this is awful, right? And they occupy 20% of the freaking building. I was like, how is anybody going to make any money on this property? That's why I killed the deal, right? Nobody's going to make money on that property. So you have to be paying attention to those things, or at least have somebody who could watch over your back, look over your back and say hey, this is going to be a problem in the future for anybody who buys it, whether it's you or the next person. It's going to be very difficult to get to a new intrinsic value, right? Increase the value of the property when you have a tenant who's at a very low rent and it is basically locked in for 9 years. You got to assume that they're going to accept the option. In a worst case scenario, they accept the option, right? Obviously, we would love for them to leave sooner, but more likely than not, they might extend. So we just got to keep that in mind. Also, when it comes to retail, you're going to want to be paying attention to a few of these key things. You're going to want to make sure that you become friendly with a local real estate agent who does leasing. So you can quickly go on LoopNet, very, very simply, go on LoopNet, and you can literally just find all the agents who have properties listed for lease in the local market. And you want to call up a few of them and, say, hey, oh, hey, John, hey, Sally, just curious, what do you believe this type, I'm looking at a property right now, what do you believe the average market rent would be for a property like X, Y, and Z? I see that you have a couple listings. Like, what do you think the market value of this property is lease-wise, price per square foot-wise? Do you think it's triple net? Do you think it's gross? Like, what's most common in these markets? And you're going to get a couple of opinions. And then if everyone keeps saying the same number, like in this case, everyone kept saying it was somewhere between $12 and $14 triple net, I was like, okay, I can obviously, 3 people said the same thing, $12 to $14 triple net. So I knew that I would get between $12 and $14 triple net, and I underwrote it at $12 triple net. And now when it comes to geographically, where to invest your money when it comes to retail, I would stay away from tertiary markets. What that means is like the out in the woods, the super suburban areas. You want to be going where a population is above 20 or 30,000 people. Above 20 or 30,000, I would probably be as large as possible, right? The larger the better, right? I live in Miami Beach, right? Like, you're going to want to be going into areas where, don't get me wrong, you're going to be paying a higher price per square foot, a higher price overall for the property, but you're going to make sure you have better tenants, right? This is what's going to happen, and they're also going to pay you more money for the square footage or on a price per square foot basis. So it's important to pay attention. I like buying in secondary markets, not primary markets like downtown Brickell, right? Like, I can't afford to be buying a $20 million Class A retail building for, at a 3 cap. I think it's ridiculous. Like, it's just like, I would be losing money. I'm not Blackstone, for God's sakes, right? I'm looking for internal, great rates of return. So I try to buy in secondary markets for tertiary prices, right? I try to find good deals in secondary markets, which means like, a couple miles out of the primary markets, right? So you look at wherever a primary market is and you want to go maybe one town over or a couple miles out from that primary market, but not just too far where you're in a tertiary market where your population is 3,000 people. All right, let's talk about industrial. So industrial is another asset class that I absolutely love. I'm a huge fan of it. As someone who's bought a lot of properties, multifamily, retail, and industrial, I can tell you from personal experience, it's very important to pay attention to a very few key things when it comes to retail and industrial properties. They're very similar in a lot of ways, which is it's all about price per square foot. When it comes to industrial properties, I specifically am looking for properties that I'm buying it at a lower than market value at a price per square foot basis, right? So if market value for price per square foot is like $200 a square foot, I want to buy as close as possible to $150 a square foot or less, because that means I'm buying at a pretty good price, because my future value is going to be $200 a square foot. If I know that it's only going to be worth $200 a square foot right now, why on planet Earth would I want to pay $200 a square foot? It doesn't make any sense. Key things to pay attention to when you're buying industrial: cheaper price per square foot, so you want to be trying to buy the best deals possible. Same thing as retail, right? You want to be buying the best price per square foot as possible. Number next is that you want to be buying in good geographic locations, very similar to what we mentioned with retail, right? I like to buy in secondary markets for tertiary prices. Okay, same exact thing for retail. Now, when it comes to reviewing the leases, again, very similar to retail. I would recommend that you try to find small bay warehouses, which means you find a warehouse that's maybe 10,000 or 20,000 plus square feet, and you have a lot of small bays, right? So it's broken down into, let's just say 4 tenants at 2,500 or 5 tenants at 2,000 square feet. You're gonna have a much better experience with small bay warehouse space versus one large building, like 100,000 square feet, even if it's a great price per square foot in some instances, but it's a big building where it doesn't have a lot of spaces and it's vacant, right? Like, because if you have one tenant in a big 100,000 square foot building and they only have 3 years left, what happens after 3 years? What happens if they leave? Now you're 100% vacant. I'm not a fan of those. I like small bay warehouses. I was just doing a video today on my CRE News Hour podcast, and we were talking about how small bay warehouses are one of the highest demand types of warehouses out there. I mean, it is the hottest aspect of industrial real estate. What you should be doing is following those trends, right? Like, it's important to invest where the money's going. Small bay warehouses, where the demand is, where all the tenants are going, is very, very high demand right now, basically all over the United States. And if you're looking at huge distribution centers, there's a lot of space that is sitting vacant. I would recommend, as big as you can, buy small bay warehouse space, okay? At a good price per square foot, because it's gonna be very, very helpful to be buying below market value, of course, if you can. When you're looking over the leases, you want to be able to tell, are they a gross rent or are they triple net? And who's paying the expenses? Are you the landlord paying the expenses because it's a gross lease? Or is it triple net where the tenants pay all the expenses? Obviously, it's very favorable for you to be buying a property, industrial building where the tenants have all triple net leases. It's very, very lucrative. And the returns are typically going to be substantially higher over time. I specifically like to find properties where the landlord has already set up a lot of triple net leases, where a majority of the tenants are on triple net leases. This way, when I renew them, they already know it's on triple net leases, so it's a very easy transition. And I can increase increase rents hopefully, and and get to a point where I'm getting to a much higher rate of return faster, because that's what we look for. A couple key things to look at when you're looking at industrial are going to be the following. Number one, ceiling heights. I like to try to buy ceiling heights above 20 feet. I think 20 feet is about the minimum we like to look at. Maybe you can get as low as 16 or 18, but I would try to shoot for 20 minimum. And then if you can get to 30, that'd be fantastic, right? Like the higher the ceilings, the better. I would really try to 20 plus is really the minimum. Next is, do they have any loading docks or bay doors where people can break that up into every single tenant in the space might have their own loading dock and they might have their own bay door. You're gonna want to make sure you find that. Flex space is also incredibly important. Does it have some square footage for office? And most of the square footage is for warehouse, because I'm telling you right now, big mistake that people make when it comes to industrial, 60 or 80% office and then 20% warehouse. Like, oh, well, it's a small bay flex building. Okay, listen, it's basically an office building with a small amount of warehouse, okay? It's not a flex building, let's be clear. Like, I'm specifically looking for a flex building, a small bay warehouse building, where that specifically is warehouse is 80+% minimum. 80+% warehouse is ideal. For the right deal, I might go down to 70, where I can maybe knock down some walls of office, right, and make it larger. But ideally we look for 80% plus warehouse, 20% or less office, which that's where you get the flex idea, right? Because it's office/warehouse. So keep in mind that if you're buying majority office, you're buying an office building. Stay away from office, please, for the love of God. Stay away from office buildings. You're probably gonna lose money. I don't want to hear that. I want to make sure you guys make a lot of money investing in real estate. Like, it's absolutely changed my life. I want it to change yours. So keep in mind, stay away from office. Last thing to pay attention to: how much space do you have for parking, right? How much extra space do you have in the parking lot around the building, right? Like, how much extra square footage do you have for parking? Because some of these tenants also are going to have trucks. So you can add truck parking. We were even talking about that again on the podcast today. Do you have any ability for truck parking or even self-storage, like putting up some extra self-storage spaces where you can, help your tenants store stuff, or you can even have the public store some goods there as well. It's important to know when you're looking at an industrial building, there is many facets to this world of industrial, like there is many facets to retail. You need to be making sure that you're looking at the right type of product, because there is ways that you can lose money. So going too small will be a problem, right? If you only go for a couple thousand square feet, I think you're going to have typically have some problems. Buying a building that's mostly office versus mostly warehouse space, you're going to have some problems. Buying a property with too small of ceilings, like when the ceiling heights are really, really low, you're going to have some problems there. You're not going to have so many people who are interested in renting from you. Same thing with, again, if it's one huge space and it's not chopped up into a couple small bay warehouse spaces, like if you're buying a 20,000 square foot building and it's only one large 20 square foot space, you're going to run into some problems. If you also don't have any loading docks or bay doors, you're going to run into some problems, or drive-ins, right? You're going to run into some problems. So keep in mind, these are all things that you should be checking off when you're looking at a property. Does it have this? Does it have that? What's the square footage? Like, what's the ceiling height? What's the, how many bay doors does it have? Is it a small bay warehouse? What's the percentage of office versus warehouse? You want to be paying attention to all these different metrics, because if you buy incorrectly, you will have problems down the road. Anyways, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I tried to break down just about each and every single aspect that I could. I love to be able to support you with any questions you have. I hope this video helps you buy your first piece of commercial real estate. And other than that, guys, thank you guys so very much. If this helped you, by the way, make sure you give this a thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Other than that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, everybody.